that you discussed was how, he realized, I think he was perhaps one of the first to realize that, people are coming to games to see me. Fans are coming to see me. My face is marketable. They're cheering for the name on the back of the jersey just as much as they are for the front of the jersey. And because of that, I have power to, make decisions and move the needle in different ways. And I wonder if some of that had to do with, one thing I've always been fascinated with was his transition from football to Hollywood and acting. And what was it that prompted that? Was it his own decision to, save himself from football and the beating he's taking and realizing that, I'm a marketable person and I can capitalize on the fame that I've created through football in other
Yeah,
ways?
I mean, first of all, he was recruited to be a movie star. I mean, he was famous, he was handsome. We were in a period where Sidney Poitier was becoming a famous and bankable star, and Jim Brown was seen as, like, as one person put it at the time, like he's going to be the Black John Wayne. Unfortunately, Hollywood at the time was also really racist, and so there was a ceiling to how high Jim Brown could go. But we'll get to that, I'm sure, in a little bit, like the inner workings of the Hollywood that Jim Brown tried to navigate, which were even far more treacherous than even the National Football League. But he acted in one off season, I believe the film. I'm blanking on the name of the film, but it was a Western, and he did well with it. Uh, no, no,
Was
no.
it
Dirty
Dirty
Dozen
Dozen?
was the next film.
Oh,
So he had already sort of
okay.
established himself and gotten a foothold at that time. And as I'm talking to you right now, I'm so darn curious about the name of that film. I'm looking it up a little bit, but I'm going to stay focused.
Rio
Yes, thank
Conchos.
you,
I just
thank
pulled it
you,
up on
thank
Wikipedia.
you. That was the film, and
Sure.
and it did well. And then he was recruited to do the Dirty Dozen. Now, for him, yeah, this was going to be the transition from football to Hollywood, but he saw it as something that could link itself arm in arm. Another very revolutionary thought, if you think about it. Like, he was saying, I'm more than an athlete. I'm going to be this guy too. Ahead of its time for sure in that approach.
Isn't that the name of LeBron's
Yeah,
company, More Than an Athlete?
exactly. I mean, that's what it's
Yep.
all about, man. About us being defying what this country, the boxes this country tries to put us in. It's like James Baldwin said, and I always think about this with regards to a lot of these athletes from this era. He said, America is a country devoted to the death of the paradox. It's like everybody's got to be in a square peg in a square hole, and Jim Brown was too big for the NFL. So he's filming The Dirty Dozen. He's 29 years old. Everybody knows The Dirty Dozen is going to be a big hit, starring huge stars like Lee Marvin. They're filming in Europe, and now here comes Art Modell, the owner of the Cleveland Browns, to say that, to assert his will basically over Jim Brown and say, football comes first, not Hollywood. Get your ass back from Europe and come to training camp, or I'm going to fine you. I think it was like $5 a day or $10 a day, like some just obnoxious sum. And Jim Brown, and this was in Time magazine, Jim Brown read from a speech on the Dirty Dozen set, retiring, and saying that here's that word. He was saying that he was not going to be treated as anything less than a man, and therefore would be retiring from pro football at age 29. He wins MVP his last year in the league. That's his third MVP. Frankly, he should have won more than three. He led the NFL in rushing 8 times in 9 years, for goodness sakes. But that was his end. And the Dirty Dozen did catapult him into Hollywood. And what he quickly found in Hollywood, it was such a time in flux in Hollywood. I think I'll just say one last thing about this particular period, about what made Jim Brown so important to Hollywood. There's a film critic named Donald Bogle, who's a black man who was interviewed by Spike Lee for his documentary about Jim Brown called Jim Brown All American. And Donald Bogle said Sidney Poitier was the first black movie star. Jim Brown was the first black movie star with a penis. And what he was trying to say was that, I'm a big Sidney
Yeah.
Poitier fan, but like they were scared to make him romantic in the late 60s, even in films where he had a wife or girlfriend, like Patches of Blue, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. There was a, particularly in interracial relationships, there was a fear to make him that kind of love interest. Jim Brown, coming into Hollywood, sexual revolution, both on screen and off, was there to do was there to have sex and express himself sexually as part of his movie persona and his real life persona, but his movie persona, that was new for a black actor to be able to do that. And it should have laid the template for him to be the Black John Wayne. Instead, it made him a mainstay of blaxploitation cinema, which in the 1970s seemed like the only thing that white Hollywood could do with black masculinity was say, let's make these cheaply made films. Some of these films are cult classics today. Like I could watch The Mac right now and be very happy. But a lot of these films, if we're being honest, are very shoddily done. A lot of them are in horribly poor taste. A lot of them are terribly misogynistic. And so the money and the screenwriting and the infrastructure to make good films with black men, nuh-uh. It just wasn't there for Jim Brown. And even his force of will could not change Hollywood in that regard.
Yeah, there was that line between being hypersexualized and but not being able to be sexualized in the context of white America. And I believe he had the first ever interracial love scene in a major
That is
Hollywood film. Is
correct.
that correct?
With Raquel Welch in 100 Rifles, which was a big hit at the time. That love scene was incredibly controversial at the time. Hell, Jim Brown's, this is how this epic this love scene was. Jim Brown's writing about that love scene in his book Out of Bounds, which I believe came out in 1989, his memoir, that was about as controversial as the scene itself, like the detail with which he talked about it. And then Raquel Welch pretty much calling BS on Jim's description of the love scene in the documentary about Jim Brown All American, was also controversial. So the reverberations of that love scene really did last decades, even if we don't speak about it necessarily in 2023.
Mhm.